Hello, I'm Stuart Mackenzie, Senior Vice President for FireEye Mandiant. I cover Europe, Middle East and Africa. Thank you for having me here today. CyberUK is something I really enjoy supporting. It's one of those dates that goes straight into my diary every year when it's announced. I think the information sharing, the chatting to organisations about the things that they're seeing and what are they doing to better protect themselves is a really useful conversation. And the work that the NCSC do to enable that information sharing, I think is really important. I think it's something that, I don't think we could actually live without. I think it's so important for organisations to have that safe environment where we can discuss what we're doing. I'd like to talk to you today about a few different themes. I'd like to cover our M-Trends reporting that we've just completed, and then maybe move on to some of the changing threat landscape and also what I think we could be doing about it. M-Trends is the yearly report we produce, which is looking at all the investigations we conducted over that time. The period we map from is from 1st of October through to 30th of September. So this year, obviously, it's from 19 through to September 2020. M-Trends has been going now for over 10 years, and it's something I'm really proud to be part of, because I think it's one of those, before I even joined Mandiant, it was one of those things that I waited for to read. It's always given me really good insight into what's going on in the threat environment. And over that time, we've seen significant changes. We now track 1,900 different groups, 41 of which we categorise as APT. So that's nation-state threat actors, people who are interested in industrial espionage, or the theft of IP. I don't think we see that same widespread theft of IP that we saw back in probably pre-2012. I think the pacts that were signed with Cameron and Obama really had quite a significant impact. So that has been good to see. We also track 11 fin groups. They're cyber criminals, people who are interested in theft or financial gain. It's been interesting to see that evolve over time. And I think the key metrics that people are interested in are where notifications come from. So how are intrusions detected? When we first started, over 90% of intrusions were detected by external parties or third parties. These are organisations, it would have been people like CPNI at the time, coming to tell organisations that they detected a breach, or organisations like Mandiant with victim notifications. We're now seeing a greater percentage of organisations being able to detect their own incidents. 59% is the global number now. 59% of organisations detect internally, which is fantastic. That's a complete sea change from where we were a few years ago. In EMEA, it's 53%, not quite as good, but I think we are significantly improving. I think when we look at the global medium dwell time, so that's the amount of time the attackers in the environment before they're detected, that's also significantly improved. So when we first started reporting, it was over 400 days, which is a huge amount of time for an attacker to be in an environment. It's now down to 24 days, that's having a real meaningful impact. In America, internal detection or internally detected attacker activity is down to 9 days. The external notifications is up to 73 days. So if you're down in that low single digit or in the single digits for intrusion detection internally, that's fantastic. That's being able to spot an attacker yourself incredibly quickly. In EMEA, we stayed flat at 29 days. Our external notification has dropped from 301 days down to 225, which is still way too long. So pulling that in and reducing that number is really important. I think one of the interesting trends we've seen this year is the move to increase exploitation of vulnerabilities. It's not that phishing hasn't carried on. Phishing is still the chosen weapon for most threat actors, but many are now complementing that with vulnerability exploitation. So we've seen multiple exploitation of VPNs. We also see attackers exploiting poorly configured systems. But that exploitation isn't just from cyber criminals. We also saw very sophisticated attacks from UNC 2452. So we call groups either FIN, APT or UNC. UNC is an uncategorized group where we still need more information to be able to successfully name them and understand their complete mode of operation. UNC2452 has been widely reported by US government to be SVR Russia, but we saw UNC2452 exploit SolarWinds in what we called Sunburst, and they were able to get into the build process of the network monitoring tools that SolarWinds supply to many organizations around the world, and they were able to conduct highly sophisticated intrusions against very high value espionage targets. But that level of sophistication isn't going to be targeted at every organization. The cost to an attacker is high. To be able to roll an exploit, the research that's needed to do that is incredible. You've then got to choose your targeting, and you've got to stay under the radar. The amount of effort and resource involved in conducting a campaign like that makes it prohibitively high for organizations. So they don't want to burn those capabilities. So for us to be able to disrupt it and burn that capability, I think is a very positive thing and will probably cause the attackers some challenges. But we then saw other threat actors and nation states chaining together multiple vulnerabilities. I think it was 4 0 days in exchange in the Hafnium attacks. So we're seeing that level of sophistication right across. But we're seeing that sophistication not just in nation states, but we also see it in cyber criminals. I think the way that we describe ransomware has to change, because when I think of ransomware attacks, and ransomware attacks are prolific now, I see ransomware as, for me, it evokes images of the 2000s. It's crypto locker, it's a spray and pray type attack. And the attackers are more of a nuisance than a sophisticated cyber criminal. And they're going after multiple organizations, hoping to hit one or two. Nowadays, though, we need to think of this ransomware as multifaceted extortion. These attackers aren't just encrypting files. They're operating in a completely different model from that view of the 2000s. It's ransomware as a service. They recruit affiliates to deploy the ransomware on their behalf. They will buy access. We have access brokers now, people who conduct intrusions and then sell that intrusion, sell that access on through brokers into ransomware providers or other threat actors who could use that exploitation of credentials. So we need to think about, what the threat actors are going to do. So for now, for ransomware, when we thought of that, that crypto locker, the answer to that problem was offline backup. You would just make sure that your backups were conducted on a regular basis and that they were air-gapped and you had a way to rebuild your system. That's not what the threat actors do now. The threat actors realize that that's how we were solving that problem. So they've changed now. So when they get onto a network, the first things they'll do is they'll look for sensitive data and they'll extract that. They'll steal some of the data, exfiltrate it off to another server, and then come back to you and say to you, we've encrypted your machines and we've stolen your data. That threat of the stealing of data means that there's no longer a possibility that organizations can just rebuild. They're having to deal with the data loss. And the ransomware threat actors now name and shame or auction off that threat of the stolen data to the highest bidder or just release it into the public domain. And when I talk to organizations, what I tend to see is that most organizations who suffer an intrusion think that they had it covered. They thought that they had good protections in place and that they deployed their endpoint technology everywhere and there was no way for an attacker to get in. Attackers are very skilled at finding the weaknesses. So we've got to test our effectiveness of our controls all the time. We've got to test in the best way possible and test against capable threats. So use red teamers, use a validation tool, use something that says to you, what is my exposure? So then you can talk to the board about the exposure and understand how much my tools are protecting me. I think finding ways to encourage organizations to work with law enforcement during the intrusion or work with incident response providers during the intrusion will allow us to better detect threat actors, allow us live access to those cyber criminals so we can conduct better investigations. And I really want to build on that and build on the great work the NCSC have done by encouraging that cooperation between law enforcement and organizations to better disrupt cyber criminals, because that's the best weapon we have against them. Being able to disrupt them means it is more costly and it will deny them easy access to systems. I want to thank everyone for listening and watching. I hope everyone has a fantastic Cyber UK. I'm going to be dialing in and watching as many sessions as I can because I always find it very useful. But thank you very much. Have a great conference.